If you've followed my channel for a while, then you've probably at least heard of Galaxy Grudge Match. I've brought up a few episodes in previous videos, and I've promoted the only good one that I've been on in my community tab. This is a show I like a lot, and so I figured I'd review the first 12 episodes. I went with the first 12 since that's half of what's planned to be the full first season. I think anyway. That changes around a lot, and I guarantee it'll be outdated when this video gets released. But anyway, I'm gonna go through each episode one by one in chronological order and give my opinions on them. So let's start off with the very first. The one that started it all. What can I even say about this episode? Well, I can say that it hasn't aged all that well, that's for sure. But that helps give it a certain charm, I suppose, in the same way as Death Battle's first few episodes. The episode was generally well written, and the scenario was an interesting one to kick off the show with. Thanos allowing the scenario to happen at all would probably be out of character for him, but the non-tentacle nature of it fits the Looney Tunes perfectly. I'm very glad that of all the fictional characters they could have chosen to star in the debut episode, they chose my 4 favourite fictional characters of all time.
But also Thanos as well.
Supergiant can fuck off though. The episode is decently funny. My favourite joke has to be the absolute gutbuster of the Sans get dunked on meme. Comedy truly has peaked. Though I feel it would have been funnier if done nowadays. Not because the show's infinitely improved in every aspect, but because Ducko would be far more unrelenting on Thanos and the Dumpling Patrol. But alas. Like I said earlier, the episode is aged pretty poorly in terms of mic quality and editing and what have you, but the only part of that I'm really bothered by is that Max is really difficult to hear at points during part 2. So yeah, a solid start to the show. I can't wait to watch Shredder vs Bane next. Bill vs Pennywise was a pretty big step up from the first episode. The editing has a lot less noticeable errors, and Max doesn't sound like he's recording into a toilet paper roll. The episode feels a lot more complete as well, since there's an actual explanation for the winner, which Space Jam vs Infinity War was lacking. It's also a decently interesting scenario. Usually a fight on this show wouldn't interest me all that much, but with the characters being basically even in stats, it comes down to their personalities and abilities to decide the verdict. It makes the debate a whole lot more interesting to me. Though this is still early in the show's lifespan, so they hadn't fully found their footing yet. There were a few jokes that made me laugh, but not a whole lot. And maybe it took a bit too long to get through each prediction, especially the Fortnite video response. This definitely doesn't hold up compared to later episodes, but it's still pretty good in its own right. It's definitely a lot closer to a 7 out of 10 than the first episode was. I can't believe after this episode they scrapped the idea of the debaters deciding the verdict in a space restaurant. That was so quirky and funny. Ash vs Ash was the first Galaxy Grudge match I ever saw. I didn't fully understand the concept of the show at first, but maybe that's because I was only half paying attention and watched it while I was on the verge of falling asleep. But after I rewatched it and actually paid full attention to it, I really enjoyed it. Several rewatches later, and that hasn't changed. The debate for this one is certainly the most interesting one out of what I've covered so far, with both characters having to save each other's worlds. Though I will say that the debate feels like it constantly goes round in circles, with many of the same feats and weaknesses being mentioned for Ketchum for a good amount of the comments. It also never really felt like Ketchum had a shot of winning, not because the match was a stomp, but because apparently Brandon wasn't able to write part 2 at the time and Ducko had to do it all himself. This led to him having significantly more lines in the episode as well. For every sentence that Brandon said, Ducko had an entire paragraph. Still, I think he did a good job making the episode entertaining. I found him getting pissed off at the comments really funny. He also added jokes I would never have expected from him. I still cannot believe that to this day, Ducko is the only Galaxy Grudge match host to reference Doug Walker in an episode. The opening scenario for this one is also the one that's been memed the most amongst me and my group of friends, so there's that as well, I guess. Oh wait, hold on, I'm gonna have to change the score to a 10 real quick, because Ducko included Shiny as background music, and even kept the part in the middle where the song stops completely as Maui transforms into different animals. This is quite based if I do say so myself. Chipmunks vs Muse was my favourite episode when it came out, and it stayed in that top spot for a good while. Even when I did my top 15 favourite Versus Show episodes last year. Not due to any super deep connections I have with the characters or anything like that, but it's just a whole lot of fun to revisit. Max and Ribbit are able to bounce off each other really well in both parts, even when they don't talk to each other for most of part 1. This is the only episode where part 1 had me laughing just as much as part 2. The Uncle Ian bag joke is still one of my favourites in the whole show. I don't want to spoil much about this episode, since the jokes are best experienced blind. One thing I will say though is that Ducko added "You're Welcome" and the Zumbo's Just Desserts theme in the background for my comment, and that just made me really happy. This episode stayed my favourite for a good while in spite of the confusion surrounding where the scenario took place, as well as Ribbit's mic quality in part 1. But those are literally the only issues I have with the entire episode. Otherwise, it's perfect. Bill and Ted vs. Billy and Mandy is the first episode to come out that got me into a new series, that being the Bill and Ted films. Without this episode, I would never have had the incentive to watch Napoleon in the water park, so I can appreciate the episode more for that. Much like the last episode, I find this one really funny. Brandon and Ribbit are able to play off each other pretty well. I don't know why, but I find both of them just bullying the comment section really funny. Brandon also subverted my expectations in a really clever way with that Sans joke. Truly a prime example of alternate comedy if I've ever seen one. The debate for this one was also an interesting one to watch unfold behind the scenes, partially because of how close it ended up being, but also partially because of how much of an unclear mess the scenario was in some areas. Part 1 also feels a little on the short side, but I also really like how both parties end their rebuttals. I also really love the song that plays during the explanation for the results. This is a really great episode. I hope the series can keep up this good streak with the next one. Oh no. This episode has not aged particularly well, to put it nicely. Before I rag on what is easily the worst episode of the show, I'll go over the things I actually like about it. Ducko ended up contributing to a lot of the cursed stuff in a good way. I like the meteor feet joke, and I found Huan saying every single Australian stereotype Ducko could think of pretty funny. And that wasn't even all of them, a few did get cut during the scripting process. I like some of the song choices as well. Ducko debating to Rubber Band Rubber Balls is amazing. Huan debates to the song Firework, but all the lyrics are replaced with the word plastic bag. For some reason, Gangnam Style was in part 2 as well. Ducko even put in the description that he doesn't know why. How very quirky. Can't stop him. What will he do next? Also, I know it's a dumb line, but Stretch could get mad dick if he wanted will never not be at least somewhat amusing to me. Max and Ducko also wrote their debates quite well in part 1. Alright, that's literally every single thing I liked. Notice how the vast majority of them were entirely because of ironic enjoyment. This is not a good sign, oh god. Now for what I didn't like. The comment readings in this episode are really bad. There are a few okay ones, but most range from boring at best to just straight up annoying at worst. The episode had a few jokes that I thought were ironically enjoyable enough, I guess. But none of them actually got me to laugh. I'd definitely call this the least funny episode of the show. Huan throwing the debate almost immediately was a bit cringe as well. We didn't specify the order of results in the episode, but I think the general consensus right now is that Plastic Man would have gotten second place. So that makes it all the more disappointing that he was made out to stand no chance. Speaking of Huan, he was asleep when the rest of us decided we wanted to script part 2, but we said fuck it and decided to write it anyway. We then just told him to make whatever edits he wanted to the script after he woke up. I've been told by Nemesis that it was incredibly obvious that Huan was mostly not behind the writing for his own lines, so that was probably a bad idea in hindsight. It also meant he'd never really got to banter with anyone. But yeah, speaking of banter, Ducko's the only person here who gets to play off of anyone. I think Max and I interact once, Max and Huan interact once, but me and Huan don't interact at all. Even if we did have more interactions, Huan and I just don't have the same kind of natural chemistry with Max and Ducko that Brandon and Ribbit do. They'd only known me for 6 months at the time, and it was their first time even meeting Huan. The first Battle Royale would have definitely benefited a lot from having Brandon and Ribbit instead. Oh yeah, also my mic quality in both parts is absolutely shit. Helen is used to fighting alongside her own super family who are... Actually, shut the fuck up. Oh my god, you absolute lobotomite.
Did you watch Biff Weed's section of the video even?
Well, I can't blame them for skipping it. It's fucking awful. And even if they did watch it, how were they meant to hear my 2 decibel audio levels? There are a few jokes where the setup for them got cut off, but not the punchlines. Huan referenced a line that I changed in part 1, that you wouldn't even know about unless you had access to the script. At one point he says Killer Instinct like it's a pun, despite never mentioning it before. And my dark combo breaker line got cut, so this part of the video here makes no sense. Anyway, yeah, this episode's awful and I don't want to talk about it anymore. Moving on. To this day, I think Sonic vs. Bart is the closest episode of the show. Seeing the debate play out not just in the episode, but behind the scenes as well, was really interesting. It's one of the most unique Galaxy Grudge match scenarios for sure, until Ducko brought up Bart directly saying he would lose this exact scenario after the verdict was decided. He waited so long because, well, it wouldn't benefit me, and, at the end of the day, it is my show. The actual episode is really good. The jokes mostly land, the arguments are interesting to listen to, and the episode never really drags. Outside of the comment readings, that is. Though, not all of the comedic value is unironic, since this was easily the most cursed episode of the show. There are so many inside jokes that were put in the script or directly spawned from this episode. Of course, there's Brandon's
"It's like a fine bacon." I won't finish that.
But Ducko has the bulk of the cursed quotes.
I think you need to stop smoking all that biff weed.
Is the worst thing ever, and I absolutely love it. Also, he put time high in the episode with no prompting from me, and I'm still in complete shock about that. Ducko is the most aggressively against memes out of us all, but he's the one who said the most cursed stuff on the show, so add this all to the list, I guess. The end scenario is one of my favourites. It's a nice change of pace from the way these episodes typically end. Though that's not to say I don't like the usual happy endings. Another thing worth pointing out is that this is the debut of a new visual style, and I really like the change a lot. Though I do think Moss vs. Sheldon did improve on it further. As for the negatives, the comment readings are mostly pretty boring. There are some funny ones, but for the most part they really drag. This was back when it was all being figured out, so all the comments were read word for word with nothing to trim them down or make them more memorable. The Dark Combo Breaker one is good though, and I like that Max tried to do an impression of himself. That was funny. Before I move on to Ronald vs. Clownpiece, I should probably at least acknowledge Max Grabelski vs. the Trickster. It isn't an official episode, but it's a really great pair of April Fool's videos, and I love both parts a lot. Definitely go check it out, it's my favourite April Fool's vs. episode. Oh, also, before I move on to Ronald vs. Clownpiece, Max vs. Trickster and Sonic vs. Bart gave me all the audio clips I needed to make this.
Reality includes time.
Time. Thanks for the tip.
The fabled episode that took so long to come out that the next 2 episodes were fully completed between parts 1 and 2. Was the wait worth it? Honestly, yeah. Ducko and Mage are really funny together, and this is by far and away the best comment readings of any Galaxy Grudge match. I love how Ducko just leaves his mic on as he skims through them, it's just really funny. And Mage does some comedic voices. I really like the parts where the comments just break him and he goes into a laughing fit. The scenario is an interesting one, and it's a damn shame that Clownpiece is so obscure because I think she would have gotten a lot more support in the comments otherwise. Well, that's not the only reason Clownpiece struggled. Ducko did kind of rig it a little. Even if McCheese being assassinated was never really a big deciding factor in the debate. Mage is still able to put up a really good debate for Clownpiece though. It's never super obvious who's gonna win, which is always a good thing. My only issue is that Ducko and Mage wrote their segments of the part 2 script separately, so they don't really get to banter a whole lot. This leaves the comment readings to carry out the episode in regards to comedy, but they do carry the episode insanely well, so I can't really hold it against the episode too much. Even though it's not my favourite episode overall, part 2 of Mystery Inc. vs. the Investigation Team is my favourite individual part of any episode that I've covered up until now. Brandon and Max are able to play off each other quite well, and the vast majority of the jokes land. This is also the episode that helped make comment readings as a whole a lot less tedious, since from this point on, the comments were trimmed down instead of the entire things being repeated word for word. It's a welcome change, since the comments dragging on did hold a lot of the older episodes down. Then there's the ending, which I loved, but I don't want to spoil it just in case you haven't seen it. I know it hasn't sat well with a lot of people, but I love the subversion from the way these episodes usually end. And the reactions that Max and Brandon have to it at the end make it even better. I don't know how people can say this episode is bad solely because of the ending, while also being part of the death battle community. So why isn't this my favourite? To be honest, I just don't really give a shit about this matchup, so that makes it a lot harder for me to get invested in it. That's why this is the only Galaxy Grudge match I didn't leave a comment for. Even with Ronald vs. Clownpiece or Jimmy vs. Haruo, I had enough to write a single paragraph on them, but the debates for this episode, while still well argued, just went in one ear and out the other for me. Still, for me to adore an episode this much, even with that handicap, goes to show just how good it really is. Unless you have any attachment to the losing team, then you probably won't agree with me on that one. Moss vs Sheldon is in a similar boat as Chipmunks vs Muse. I thought the episode was just gonna be one big shitpost when I first saw the matchup, but then it ended up being a really interesting debate in spite of that. I already loved this episode upon first viewing, but afterwards I watched the IT crowd and loved the show, so that helped me appreciate the episode even more. Then, rewatching the episode, I recognised so many quotes from the show that I never took note of on my first viewing. I love when episodes are like that. They have jokes that you'll get if you've seen the source material, but if you haven't, then you don't even notice them, so you don't feel like you're missing out on anything. Max and Ribbit are able to play off each other really well in this episode, albeit not quite as well as their last episode together. There are a good amount of memorable jokes and one-liners here. I love the scenario as well. Putting them both in pixels fits them both so perfectly. This episode coming out also motivated me to rewatch Pixels.
That was some twisted Pinocchio Geppetto stuff right there.
God, it's so shit, but I like it so much.
Why not? Why won't you sing?
Because singing killed my grandma, okay?
I wish I'd rewatched Pixels and watched IT Crowd sooner though, maybe then my comment would have been a bit better. Speaking of the comments, that's the only major issue I have with this episode. The comment readings are trimmed down a lot so they don't drag nearly as bad as in Sonic vs Bart or the Stretch Royale, but they're still pretty boring and I tend to skip them every time. Even Ribbit's Ducko comment reading isn't standout at all. It's the only one of the four that I never really want to go back to. Outside of the comment readings, this is still an amazing episode. Let's hope this good streak can keep going. Oh fuck, not again. God damn it, why are my episodes always the ones that have to break the really good streaks on this show? Honestly, the more I think about this episode, the less and less I like it. Maybe it isn't the worst non-Stretch Royale episodes objectively, but when most of the episode's shortcomings are my own fault, it makes me feel more personally disappointed in this episode than any other. Again, besides the Stretch Royale. Ribbit and I didn't exactly pick the best time to script part 2. We were both super tired when we were writing it, and instead of just deciding to wait another day, we wrote the entire thing while we were both on the verge of falling asleep. This led to a good few arguments being left out of the script, even though they were talked over behind the scenes. We excluded the Nether Realm for the sake of making it a fair fight, otherwise Scorpion would have just broken the entire debate, but for some reason we just completely neglected to mention that in either part. There are also a few things we just got blatantly wrong. One of the points against Scorpion was that Joker beat him in Mortal Kombat vs DC, and we just kinda took Brandon's word on that without looking into it. But then we didn't find out until it was too late that Scorpion was the one who won that fight, so that's our bad there. Cuphead also had some abilities that we failed to mention, and I wish I'd known about them sooner because they would have turned the 2-hour-long debate into a 5-minute one. The episode's also kinda lacking in banter. A lot of the episode was just each of us saying one thing between each comment without much back and forth. I'm just really disappointed in a lot of the arguments I made in general for part 2, and I think I could have done so much better if I just waited for a more opportune time to write the script. It's also not a particularly funny episode. Outside of when I directly bully the comments, I don't find anything I say in part 2 of the episode funny. Part 1 isn't completely exempt from it all either. I really don't like how my editing for the Mortal Kombat segments turned out, with a constant fading into the purple space background between clips due to restrictions with my editing software. Thankfully I was able to do a better job in part 2 and with Garo vs Stain part 1, but my first go at editing isn't one I can look back on with any kind of fondness. In the ways of positives, I can basically sum up everything I like about this episode with some jokes still land, I like my editing in part 2, and the arguments in part 1 were well written outside of my poorly worded rebuttals. I don't hate the episode, I guess, and I think part 1 is mostly okay, with this being the only instance of me preferring part 1 of an episode over part 2. But it's not something I can look back on with pride like I do with Garo vs Stain. But I'll be covering that episode another time. There's only one more episode left to go over here. And finally, here we are, the magnum opus of not just Galaxy Grudge Match, but the entire Galaxy Video channel. Across the entire Versus genre on YouTube, you'd be hard pressed to find any episode with more passion put into it than the Teacher Royale. This is by a landslide my favourite Galaxy Grudge match, with part 2 in particular being my favourite individual part of the whole show. This is everything the Stretch Royale should have been, but wasn't. You can tell from watching this episode just how much care and love was put into it on all fronts. Even with just the video length of part 2 alone being long enough to be counted as a feature-length film, this episode delivers in every aspect for me. The debate is an interesting one with characters I really like. While this episode was in production, it even got me to rewatch School of Rock, which I grew to love even more than I did before, as well as watch Assassination Classroom for the first time, which quickly became my second favourite show I've ever seen. I went from barely knowing who Koro-sensei was to nearly tearing up at his death. It's episodes that have a lasting impact on me like that, by getting me to check out new series that I end up loving, that lets me appreciate them even more. As for the episode itself, it's really funny. All four debaters are able to play off each other super well in a way that the Stretch Royale never delivered on. Even without playing off of anyone else, everyone has memorable jokes on their own. What I probably find funniest here though is the same as with Ronald vs Clownpiece. Ducko just leaving his mic on while he skims through the comments is the funniest shit ever. All four sides are really well argued for, with even last place having solid arguments in their favour. It's never obvious who's gonna win, and I love when episodes are closer like that. This episode also doesn't fall into the trap that most Galaxy Grudge matches do, where the second part is leagues better than the first. I do still prefer part 2, but part 1's amazing as well. There are some good jokes, especially in Max and Brandon segments. I like the end clips for each section, and I especially like Rivet's end line for Koro-sensei's segment. But yeah, I do still prefer part 2, and that's mostly thanks to how it ends. The ending with everyone explaining the winner, as well as the ending scenario, are surprisingly heartfelt, with the music complementing it perfectly. It's a beautiful ending, and is the most emotional I've ever been watching a Versus episode. There's almost no end to the positive things I have to say about the Teacher Royale. It's an absolute blast to watch through. Both parts combined are over an hour long, but it doesn't feel that long at all. And I'm gonna say something bold. I adore this episode to an extent that few other Versus shows are able to match, and only Death Battle's ever been able to surpass. I love it even more than anything Death Battle has produced since probably Jack vs Afro, and I will stand by that. And with that, I end things off on a high note, with this episode getting the show's most deserved 10 out of 10. And that was the first 12 episodes of Galaxy Grudge Match. This isn't a ranking like what I usually do, but if that's something you want to see, then I'll just put that on screen right now. Do you agree with my opinions, or are you uncultured enough to think that the Stretch Royale is actually good? I'm really curious to see what all of you have to say for these episodes. This show means a lot to me. It's a lot of fun to work on, and it's the only reason I gained any confidence to record my voice to begin with. Were it not for Galaxy Grudge Match, I probably wouldn't have made the decision to drop the text-to-speech voice until much later on. Besides Death Battle, this is easily my favourite Versus show right now, and I can't recommend it enough. I'm sure you'll enjoy most of the episodes, not the Stretch Royale though, you don't have to watch that one. I'll wrap things up now. I'll see you in my next video, as well as hopefully in my next Galaxy Grudge Match when that comes around. I was gonna end this video with a line that uses lingo from the series that I'm debating for next, but Reddit made it cringe, so I'm not doing that anymore.
Nice to see that there are some School of Rock fans among us.